Frank Lloyd Wright often defines his architecture as architecture of essences. And I'm wondering what he meant by this.
Right. So if you go through recordings of Wright speaking, you'll find in some of the interviews, he'll say, yes, of course, organic architecture is an architecture of essences. So let's see what he means by that. He writes, well, first of all, this is the Morris Gift Shop. We looked at that as a predecessor of the Guggenheim Museum. But just look at the celebration of brick, this magnificent arch coming out of Richardson, who was, a Chicago school architect. But Frank Lloyd Wright writes, what is honor? Not the rules of a code, but the nature of honor. Okay, now what does he mean here by honor? What would be the honor of a brick? That in the brick which makes the brick a brick. In other words, there's an inner will there before the brick is. That inner will gathers to itself redness, hardness, squareness that constitutes then a brick. Heidegger talks like this. It's very much rejected in contemporary philosophy, but it is very important in the 19th century. People like Emerson and Thoreau and then Wright. And it's not unique to Wright. Today we think about, steel, if we're using steel in the building, it wants to be thin and attenuated and work in tension. Concrete wants to be squat and compact and massive and work in compression. Notice I said wants to be. So how can concrete want anything? So here is Frank Lloyd Wright's mentor, Louis Sullivan. Wright worked for Sullivan. And in his last book, on the last page, Sullivan writes, first of all, up here is a seed. Imagine a peanut, and you split it open, and there's the germ in the center. And so these two split open parts provide the food to get the thing growing before the photosynthesis kicks in. So Sullivan writes, the germ is the real thing, the seat of identity. Now, there's a huge amount of wisdom compacted in here. Within its delicate mechanism lies the will to power. Where have we heard that before, the will to power?
Nietzsche.
Comes from Nietzsche, right. The function. Now, what is a will to power? He defines it. It's a function. What kind of function? A function which seeks to and eventually, the function which is to seek and eventually to find its full expression in form. So, form follows function does not mean a form responds to the square footage requirements of the building. What it means is the function is the quality that the building takes on responding to this inner will. To simplify it, the acorn wants to be an oak tree. So we said, well, it's got DNA, which is going to interact mechanistically with nutrients and make an oak tree. Okay, you can think that way. These people are artists, and they're thinking metaphorically. So Wright says the honor, which is this inner will. What is honor? Honor is that thing in the brick which makes the brick a brick. In other words, the inner will which is driving it to become a brick. Sullivan refers to as a will to power, a function which is to seek and eventually find its full expression in form. And then, so the germ is the real thing, the seed of identity. There's an essence, an identity in the germ. Within its delicate mechanism lies the will to power. This essence has a will to power. What does that mean? It means that it wants to express itself in form. The acorn wants to be an oak tree. Sullivan writes, the office building must be every inch a proud and soaring thing. The office building wants to be a proud and soaring thing. And then the architect, Louis Kahn, writes, if you think of brick, you say to brick, what do you want, brick? Again, wait a minute. The brick is an inanimate thing. How can it want anything? And brick says to you, I like an arch. And if you say to brick, arches are expensive, I can use a concrete lintel. Brick says, I like an arch. So, and Kahn begins every project with the question, what does this building want to be? Now, two problems. Number one, how can a building, an inanimate thing, want to be anything? And number two, it doesn't exist yet. We haven't even designed it yet. So Kant has built an entire philosophy around this. And so this is a very different view of what the world is, what the cosmos is, how it operates, and what the human role is, and what art and creativity are. And it's not one nutcake out there. And these are the three most important architects of the 20th century. I mean, or three among them. Louis Sullivan, Frank Lloyd Wright, Louis Kahn, saying the exact same thing. So that's what essences is. There's an inner will in a material, in a situation, and you want the brick to feel proud of what it's able to do. So how do we feel about this concept of essences today? Is this a philosophical permission that we permit ourselves to this day, something for our students to think about?
Well, I was wondering whether you think the germ is not actually the idea and the vision of the architect, and then the brick becomes what fulfills this vision. Does the brick have the capacity to contain the DNA, or you think it's related, or you think it's the idea and the vision of an architect is actually an integral part of what the result is?
So Sullivan was asked that question, and
how did he respond?
He said, you know, how can an inanimate thing, you know, steel, brick, want anything? And he says, of course it can't, but it can in dialogue with the architect.
Oh, there you go.
So in that sense, the architect is not someone who imposes a will from his or her genius,
Right.
but rather a midwife that helps something come into being. And you know, psychologists would then say, you know, what are you talking about? But every artist has at some point or other said, the novel took over and started writing itself. The painting took over and started painting itself. The characters wanted to do this or that. In other words, anyone who's created, that's what they say. Now, who are we going to listen to, the artists or the psychologists? Michelangelo says, I didn't make that sculpture. It was in there, in the stone. I simply took away the excessive stone to release the form, the figure that was already in there. Now, who's, you know, we're going to listen to some two-bit PhD psychologists, we're going to listen to Michelangelo. Who knows better what an artist is doing?
Amazing, yes. Well, we can see a lot of it. And with all the bricks that there are in the world, let's hope that there are many more beautiful buildings that come out of them. Right.
Right. So we've got one last lecture to wrap up, and that's Frank Lloyd Wright's Worldview. In other words, we've been hinting at something here, which is Wright's not living in the kind of material world that we tend to think of. What is the world he's living in?
Well, we'll see now.